Jasmine Crockett and Lauren Boebert clash in a high-stakes battle on the floor of the U.S. Capitol over a groundbreaking education reform bill that could change the future for millions of children. With over 30 million kids trapped in underfunded schools, Jasmine fights for equal access to quality education, while Boebert, dismissing her efforts, cruelly brands her the drama queen, accusing her of making a spectacle for political gain. As tensions rise and emotions boil over, Jasmine turns Boebert's insult into a weapon, challenging the very system that has failed America's children for decades. Will this drama queen triumph, or will Boebert continue to crush her? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The stage was set for a pivotal moment in the U.S. Capitol. Jasmine Crockett, a passionate Democratic representative from Texas, stood at the podium to present her bill for educational reform, aiming to ensure equal access to quality education for low-income children. Her words called for greater investment in underfunded public schools, emphasizing that every child deserved a chance at a better future. Across the room, Lauren Boebert, a staunch Republican from Colorado, watched with quiet disapproval. Known for her conservative stance and skepticism of government spending, Boebert believed in cutting costs, not increasing them. She saw Jasmine's bill as another costly measure that would add to the national debt and argued that the solution lay in school choice and parental involvement, not more government funding. The debate was about to begin with clear divisions. Jasmine fighting for educational equity, while Boebert focused on fiscal responsibility and limited government. Jasmine's proposal sought to tackle disparities in education funding, while Boebert dismissed it as ineffective, favoring school choice instead. The stage was set, and the battle for America's education system was about to unfold. The chamber was still. Jasmine Crockett's impassioned words had barely settled when the cold, calculated voice of Lauren Boebert cut through the room. Jasmine had anticipated the pushback, but the sheer venom in Boebert's tone still struck like a thunderclap. With deliberate steps, Boebert rose from her seat, her posture rigid, the look on her face one of unwavering contempt. Her eyes locked onto Jasmine, and there was no mistaking the smirk that played at the corners of her lips. Boebert was ready. This was more than a debate. It was a battle, and she wasn't going to let Jasmine's plea for equity go unanswered. Boebert's voice rang out with an unmistakable air of superiority. "Let's get something straight," she began, her words sharp, slicing through the charged atmosphere. "This bill you're proposing, this so-called solution, will do nothing but increase our national debt and waste taxpayer dollars on a failed system." The disdain was palpable, but what followed stung the room even more. Boebert's eyes never left Jasmine as she continued, her tone mocking. "You call it reform, but all it is political theater. You want to be the star of the show, don't you, Jasmine? The drama queen? That's what you are. You're here to put on a performance, to get headlines, not to fix anything that matters." Her words were venomous, sharp as knives aimed straight at Jasmine's heart. "Throwing more money at a broken system won't magically fix it," Boebert added, her voice rising with self-righteous certainty. "What we need isn't more government spending, more bureaucracy. We need real solutions, school choice, parental control, not more handouts that only make the problem worse." The insult, the drama queen, hung in the air like a taunt. Jasmine could feel it burn. It was more than just an attack on her bill. It was a denial of everything she had fought for. It was an attempt to erase the lives of the children she represented, to reduce their struggles to nothing more than a performance in Boebert's eyes. But Jasmine was not about to let this pass. She stood taller, every muscle in her body stiffening with determination, her voice steady but sharp as she prepared to respond. "Let me make one thing clear," Jasmine began, her eyes never leaving Boebert, her voice rising with quiet fury. "You want to talk about drama? You want to call me the drama queen?" Her words came out slow, deliberate, each syllable a challenge. "You're not fooling anyone. This isn't drama. This is reality. These kids, these children you're so eager to dismiss, they don't have the luxury of sitting in classrooms with the best resources, the most caring teachers, or the safest environments. They don't have the privilege of being able to choose the best school. because they don't have the option to choose at all. Jasmine's eyes flashed, her passion igniting. She took a step forward, her voice now stronger, firmer, cutting through Boebert's dismissal. You want to talk about fiscal responsibility? Well, let me tell you something, Lauren. True fiscal responsibility means investing in the future of this country. It means ensuring that every child, no matter their background, has the same opportunity to succeed. The future of this nation rests on the shoulders of these children, and it's our responsibility to ensure they have the tools they need to build it. The room was silent. Jasmine's words lingered in the air, each one piercing the heart of the argument. Boebert, for all her bravado, had no answer to that. She couldn't argue with the fact that every day children from disadvantaged backgrounds were left behind by a system that had failed them. Jasmine could feel the weight of the injustice pushing her forward, propelling her words with the force of a tidal wave. You stand there lecturing us about the dangers of government spending, but you're blind to the real problem. You're defending a system that continues to fail those who need the most help. You're choosing to protect the interests of the wealthy, those who can afford private schooling, and leaving the rest of us to pick up the pieces. Her eyes locked onto Boebert's, and she let the words sink in. You say it's a waste of money to help these kids? You want to pretend that the system isn't broken? That the countless schools in our poorest communities aren't falling apart? Jasmine's voice trembled slightly, but there was no mistaking the fierce resolve behind it. You talk about waste, but the real waste is the lives of children who are denied the chance to learn, to grow, to break the cycle of poverty. You call it waste, but what you really mean is you don't want to spend a dime unless it benefits those who already have everything. Well, I won't stand by while you write off these kids as too expensive to help. The weight of Jasmine's words settled over the room like a storm cloud. Every eye was on her now. Every word she spoke was a challenge to the very system Boebert championed. Jasmine's pulse quickened, the fire of righteousness surging through her. She could feel the truth of her message coursing through her veins, propelling her forward. You can call me the drama queen, Lauren, but the reality is this. These kids don't need more empty promises. They don't need more speeches about the dangers of government. They need action. They need us to stand up and do the right thing. For once. The silence in the room was deafening. Boebert's face had hardened, but there was something else there now, a flicker of uncertainty. Jasmine had struck a chord, and she knew it. The debate wasn't just about policies anymore. It was about justice, about doing what was right in the face of all the opposition. Jasmine had made her stand, and the fight for America's children had just begun. The tension in the room grew unbearable, the air thick with anticipation after Jasmine's impassioned speech. She had laid bare the urgent need for reform, for a fair and equal education for every child, regardless of their background. But before the room could settle, before Jasmine could gather her thoughts, Lauren Boebert's sharp voice sliced through the silence. It was cold, mocking, calculated. Boebert stood with a confident, almost smug posture, her gaze fixed on Jasmine, as if dissecting her every word. Once again, the drama queen speaks, she sneered, her voice dripping with sarcasm. This entire bill, this so-called solution, is nothing more than a distraction. It's the same tired story, just repackaged for the cameras. More government, more spending, and less accountability. All this does is add to our debt while solving nothing. Boebert's words struck Jasmine like a slap, designed to undermine her proposal, to make it seem like a mere spectacle, a performance for attention rather than a fight for justice. The insult was clear, a pointed attempt to diminish the urgency of Jasmine's cause. You call this drama, but where was the drama when these kids, these families, were falling through the cracks of a broken system? Jasmine thought, her pulse quickening, the sting of Boebert's words fueling her resolve. But Jasmine refused to let Boebert's venom seep into her bones. Instead, she took a breath, grounding herself in the truth of what she was fighting for. She wasn't going to let Boebert define her or her work. You want to call me the drama queen, Lauren? Fine, she said, her voice steady, cutting through the tension in the room. Her words hung in the air, deliberate and piercing. But this isn't drama. This is reality. This is what's happening right now in classrooms across this country where children are being left behind, where schools are crumbling, and where teachers are forced to do more with less. Jasmine's eyes locked onto Boebert's, her gaze unwavering, as she slowly walked toward the podium. She didn't flinch, didn't back down. You talk about spending, but you're protecting a system that has been failing for decades. You're defending a system that has done nothing but widen the gap between the haves and the have-nots. You defend tax cuts for the wealthy, but you refuse to see the millions of children who have no future without the proper education. Each word Jasmine spoke was a direct hit, a challenge to the hollow argument Boebert had put forward. Jasmine's voice grew stronger, her confidence rising with every truth she spoke. You say this is about the money? This is about more than money, Lauren. This is about investing in the future of this country. This is about making sure that the children who have been denied opportunities because of their zip code, because of their family's income, don't have to fight for what should already be theirs. The room was silent, every eye on Jasmine now, her words cutting through the tension like a knife. Jasmine knew this wasn't just about a piece of legislation. This was about the children she had met, the ones whose voices had been silenced for far too long. You can call it drama, you can call it whatever you want, but at the end of the day, this bill is about justice. It's about fairness. It's about making sure that every child in this country has a shot at a future, no matter what their parents can afford. And that's something you can't ignore. Not anymore. Bobert's face hardened, but Jasmine could see the flicker of doubt in her eyes. For a moment, Jasmine felt the room shift. She had hit a nerve. The truth was undeniable. You want to keep pretending this is just about a waste of money? But I'll tell you this. The real waste is the millions of lives that will be left behind if we don't act now. Jasmine's words were firm, each one filled with the weight of everything she had seen, everything she had heard from the family she represented. Her voice, though steady, carried the force of a call to action. You think I'm just playing politics, Lauren? I'm not. This isn't a game. This is real. These children are real. And I will not stand by while you continue to protect a system that is broken, that is unjust. I will not back down. If you want to call me the drama queen, then fine. I'll wear it as a badge of honor. Because this is the most important thing I'll ever do. Fight for the future of every child in this country. The room was still. Jasmine's words hung in the air like a challenge, daring anyone to question her. The weight of the moment was undeniable. For a split second, Jasmine saw the faces of her colleagues, some skeptical, some shocked, begin to soften. And for the first time in this debate, she saw Boebert hesitate. Jasmine had turned the insult around, making it a powerful statement of resolve, of purpose. And in that moment, Jasmine knew. This wasn't just about a bill, a piece of legislation. It was about something far greater. It was about changing the system, about ensuring that those who had been ignored for so long were finally seen. The battle was just beginning, but Jasmine had just found her voice, and she wasn't going to let anyone silence it. The atmosphere in the room had reached a boiling point. Jasmine's passionate defense of her bill had struck a chord with some. But Boebert wasn't done yet. The tension crackled in the air as Boebert rose once again, her posture sharp, her gaze cold. This time she wasn't just countering Jasmine's arguments, she was attacking her character. The room grew still as Boebert's voice sliced through the silence, dripping with disdain. You talk a big game, Jasmine, Boebert sneered, her words deliberately slow, each syllable heavy with sarcasm. But this is just another performance. The drama queen strikes again. You're making it seem like this is a matter of life and death. But we both know better. You're blowing this out of proportion to create a spectacle. It's nothing but political theater, and you're the star. Her eyes flicked to the room, gauging the reaction of the lawmakers before she shot Jasmine a pointed look. I guess it's easier to make a scene than to actually solve the problem, isn't it? Jasmine's jaw clenched, her fist tightening at her sides. The insult stung, but it wasn't new. Boebert's words were the same tired attacks Jasmine had heard countless times, designed to undermine her, to make her passion seem like nothing more than a staged performance. But Jasmine was no stranger to these kinds of attacks, and she wasn't about to back down now. She stepped forward, her gaze unwavering, and as she spoke, her voice was calm, but it carried the force of a storm ready to break. It's easy for you to sit there and mock what I'm fighting for, Lauren. It's easy to dismiss this as drama when you're shielded by wealth, by privilege, and by a system that works for you. But for millions of children, this is not a game. This is their future. This is the difference between them having a shot at a better life or being stuck in a cycle of poverty. Jasmine's words were sharp, each one cutting deeper than the last. You want a quick fix? A band-aid solution? But those don't work when the system is already broken. The system needs real change, and that change takes more than just lip service and empty promises. The room was so silent, Jasmine could hear her own heartbeat, loud and urgent. Every eye was on her now, every ear listening intently. Jasmine's voice, though steady, carried the weight of years spent fighting for a system that had long been neglected. What you call drama, Lauren, is the reality of children who walk into classrooms that are falling apart. It's the reality of teachers who are forced to work miracles with nothing but empty classrooms and outdated textbooks. It's the reality of families who are scraping by, trying to make sure their kids have the same opportunities that kids from wealthier families take for granted. This isn't drama. This is what happens when you refuse to invest in the future. Her chest was tight with emotion, but Jasmine didn't stop. You keep talking about easy fixes, school choice, parental control. But what does that do for the kids whose parents can't afford private school, who don't have the resources to choose a better school for their child? Those kids are stuck in schools that can't even provide basic supplies, that are overcrowded, that don't have the support they need to succeed. And you think school choice is going to solve that? Jasmine's voice was rising now, each word more forceful than the last. It's not a solution. It's a distraction. It's an excuse to ignore the real problem, the systemic neglect that's been allowed to fester for years. The tension in the room had escalated, the stakes higher than ever. Boebert remained unmoved, but the words Jasmine spoke were starting to resonate. They weren't just words. They were the cries of children who had been ignored, of families who had been overlooked. Jasmine wasn't fighting for herself. She was fighting for the future of the kids who had no voice in this debate, for the children who would continue to suffer if this system was allowed to persist. Without serious investment, without real action, this system will never change, Jasmine continued, her voice now steady and full of conviction. We can't keep throwing crumbs at the problem and pretending it's enough. We have to give these kids the resources they need to succeed. Or we'll keep watching them fall further behind while people like you, Lauren, keep talking about the cost. Jasmine's words lingered in the room, heavy with the weight of truth. She wasn't backing down. She wasn't going to let Boebert's dismissals define the conversation. The fight wasn't just about policy. It was about the lives of those who had been forgotten. And Jasmine knew she would do whatever it took to make sure their voices were heard. The room was heavy with the sound of Boebert's scornful words, the tension rising with each passing second. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't backing down. She could feel the injustice boiling within her, the years of frustration spilling out into the open. As Boebert continued to belittle her, Jasmine's resolve grew stronger. She knew that she couldn't let this moment pass without hitting the core of the issue. The lives of children were at stake. Real children, not statistics, not talking points. Jasmine took a slow step forward, her voice unwavering but intense as she began. You want to talk about drama, Lauren? Let me tell you what drama really looks like. Her eyes locked onto Boebert's, and she didn't flinch. It's the drama of children walking into classrooms that are falling apart. No books, no technology, no proper heating or cooling. That's the drama you ignore every day when you sit behind your desk and tell me it's too expensive to invest in their future. It's the drama of kids who don't have a chance, not because they're not smart, but because the system has failed them before they even stepped through the door. Her voice carried the weight of truth, the raw emotion of someone who had seen this firsthand. Jasmine didn't stop. Her words hit harder with each sentence, her passion lighting a fire in the room. Do you know how many children in public schools are forced to learn in overcrowded classrooms? Do you know how many students go without lunch because their families can't afford it? Do you know how many teachers are spending their own money just to buy pencils and paper because the schools are so underfunded? Jasmine's hand moved as if emphasizing each word. You talk about fiscal responsibility, but what's the cost of leaving these kids behind? What's the cost of not giving them the same chance to succeed as children in wealthier schools, where the halls are filled with opportunity, not decay? The silence in the room grew louder as Jasmine's words sunk in. Her gaze never wavered from Boebert, but she was speaking to everyone now. I've seen the statistics, Lauren. I've seen the reports. Schools in low-income neighborhoods are underfunded by billions of dollars compared to schools in wealthier areas. The disparity is staggering. And yet you stand here and tell me that throwing more money at the problem won't fix it? What will fix it then, Lauren? What will fix the broken promise we've made to these kids? What will fix the fact that their futures are being stolen from them because of a system that refuses to invest in them? Jasmine's words hung in the air, thick with the truth that Boebert had tried to dodge. But Jasmine wasn't done. She stepped forward, her voice now rising with fierce determination. You can call me the drama queen, Lauren, but if standing up for these children means being dramatic, then I will wear that title with pride. Because these kids don't have a voice, and if it takes a drama queen to give them one, then I'm more than happy to play the part. These children need us to act, not to sit here and argue over semantics while their lives hang in the balance. The room was silent now, every eye fixed on Jasmine. She could feel the power of her words reverberate through the space, her passion fueling the moment. The tension between her and Boebert was palpable, but Jasmine knew the truth had been spoken. This wasn't just about a bill. It was about a future that was being denied to millions of children simply because they didn't have the same resources as their wealthier peers. She paused, letting the weight of what she had said sink in. I won't apologize for fighting for these children, she continued, her voice steady and unyielding. If calling attention to their plight makes me the drama queen, then I'll take that title every day. Because these kids, these real, living, breathing children, deserve a future, and I will not stop until they get it. Her words echoed through the room, a challenge, a call to action. Jasmine had turned the insult around, using it as a weapon to shine a light on the injustice that Boebert and others like her were so eager to ignore. Jasmine wasn't just defending her bill, she was defending the future of every child who had been abandoned by a system that claimed to care. The room was electric, the weight of Jasmine's words still hanging in the air. Her powerful rebuttal had struck hard, and Boebert, despite her usual confidence, felt the sting of being unable to counter the facts laid out so compellingly. The insult of calling Jasmine the drama queen had not achieved its intended effect. Instead, it had backfired, and now Boebert found herself grappling with the realization that Jasmine was more than just a political adversary. She was a force to be reckoned with. Boebert's lips tightened as she tried to recover. She looked down at the notes in front of her, pretending to search for something new to say, but the confidence that had initially propelled her forward was fading. The audience could feel it. Jasmine had done what few could. She had exposed the real cost of Boebert's ideals. The numbers Jasmine presented were irrefutable, the stories of children left behind too raw to dismiss. Boebert tried to find a comeback, but the words stuck in her throat. How could she argue against the simple truth that education was being held hostage by budget cuts? How could she deny that millions of children were suffering because their schools were underfunded and ignored? Taking a deep breath, Boebert tried again, but this time her voice lacked the sharpness it had before. Look, she began, but her words faltered. This isn't about throwing more money into a broken system. We've tried that, and look where we are. The government doesn't fix problems, it makes them worse. We need, to empower parents, not continue pouring money into an already failing bureaucracy. Her attempt to sound resolute was hollow, as if she herself was starting to doubt the logic behind her argument. Jasmine's eyes never left Boebert. She could see the crack in Boebert's armor, the hesitation. It was a rare moment of vulnerability from a woman who prided herself on being unwavering in her stance. Jasmine, sensing the shift, pressed forward, her voice calm but laced with power. Is that really all you have left, Lauren? To push the same tired line about empowering parents? Because we both know the reality. Parents don't have the choice when their schools are starved of funding. Parents can't choose what they don't have access to. And your school choice rhetoric? It's just a distraction from the fact that you're actively sabotaging the public system instead of helping to fix it. The silence that followed was thick, pregnant with the weight of Jasmine's words. Boebert's face hardened, but it was clear she was struggling. She had nothing more to say, nothing that could address the raw truth Jasmine had just exposed. She tried to recover, her voice growing more defensive now. What we need is real, practical solutions, she said, her words becoming less coherent as she spoke. We don't need to throw more taxpayer dollars at something that isn't working. We need... She trailed off, the realization that she had no real rebuttal sinking in. Jasmine stood firm, the force of her argument crashing over Boebert's feeble attempts to recover. Real solutions, Jasmine echoed, a slight edge of sarcasm in her voice. You've had decades of so-called solutions, Lauren, but look at what's happened. Schools are still crumbling, students are still being left behind. Your solutions aren't working because they don't address the root cause of the problem. They don't fix the inequality. They don't fix the broken system. Boebert's shoulders slumped slightly, her gaze faltering for a moment. She had been the one to call Jasmine the drama queen, but now she was the one who looked like she was losing control of the conversation. Her counter-arguments were weak, her voice shaky. She was trapped in her own rhetoric, struggling to find the right words to make her case. Jasmine could see it all too clearly now. The cracks were widening, and she wasn't about to let Boebert slip away. School choice sounds great in theory, Jasmine continued, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. But let's not pretend it's a real solution for kids in underfunded schools. Let's not pretend that a voucher system will fix the fact that they're being left in the dark. The real solution is systemic change, and that's what my bill provides. Investment in these schools, proper, long-term investment, is the only thing that will work. Boebert could feel the weight of the moment, the realization that Jasmine was right. Her arguments were falling apart. The tension in the room had shifted, the power dynamics visibly changing. Jasmine had turned the tables, forcing Boebert into a defensive position, her earlier attacks now bouncing off of Jasmine's resolve. The room was watching, and Boebert could feel the eyes of every lawmaker on her, waiting for her next move. She had nothing. Jasmine had won this round. The tension between Jasmine and Boebert had reached a boiling point, with each word exchange becoming more charged than the last. Jasmine had turned Boebert's insult, the drama queen, into a weapon, a rallying cry for those who had been silenced for too long. The label that was meant to diminish her had now become the very thing that set her apart, a symbol of the deep injustice she was fighting to expose. As Boebert continued to flounder, Jasmine could feel the tide of public opinion shifting. The very term drama queen had begun to work in her favor. Jasmine stood taller, her eyes scanning the room, letting her newfound resolve wash over her like a wave. If this is what it means to be a drama queen, she said, her voice calm but filled with purpose, then I will wear that title proudly. Her words hit with the precision of a hammer striking steel. She paused, letting the room absorb the impact of her declaration. Because sometimes the reality of the world we live in, where children go hungry, where schools fall apart, where dreams are crushed before they even have a chance to take flight, is too much for people to face. So they call it drama. They call it an exaggeration. But I am here to tell you, this is no exaggeration. This is the truth. And if it takes a drama queen to tell that truth, then I will be your queen. The room was electric. The murmurs that had filled the space before were gone, replaced by an intense silence, broken only by the quiet shuffle of papers and the sound of Jasmine's steady voice. The force with which she spoke, the weight of the truth in her words, made it clear that she was no longer just playing a part. She was a force to be reckoned with, and she knew it. For the first time, the members of the room, the people watching from their screens, the media covering the event, all turned their attention to Jasmine. Her words had turned the tables, had exposed the weakness in Boebert's position. She wasn't just fighting for a bill anymore. She was fighting for the very people who had been denied their fair shot at life, the very children who had been written off as expendable. "And you can call me whatever you like, Lauren," Jasmine continued, the fire in her voice unmistakable. "But the truth remains the same. These children need us to act now. They need us to see their struggle, to understand their pain. You can mock me all you want, but it won't change the fact that this system is broken, and it's up to us to fix it." The crowd, previously silent, began to stir. A few heads nodded in agreement, the undercurrent of Jasmine's words reaching them, resonating in ways Boebert's rhetoric never had. What Jasmine had just done was nothing short of a masterstroke. The moniker Boebert had thrown at her like a stone had been repurposed into the armor she now wore with pride. She had turned the very idea of being overly dramatic into something positive, something that brought the harsh truths to light. "The drama queen?" Jasmine said, her voice almost amused now. "Fine. If that's what it takes to get your attention, then I'll be that. I'll be whatever it takes to make you listen." As her words reverberated through the room, Jasmine could see the shift. Some of Boebert's allies were no longer looking so sure of themselves. They were beginning to understand what was happening here. What they had dismissed as mere theatrics had turned into a powerful movement for change, a movement that could no longer be ignored. Public sentiment began to turn in Jasmine's favor. Social media buzzed with support. People were beginning to see that what Jasmine had labeled drama wasn't drama at all. It was a call to action, a wake-up call for a system that had long neglected those in need. The term "the drama queen" was no longer a slight, it was a badge of honor. Jasmine had become the embodiment of what it meant to stand up against injustice, to fight for those who had no voice. She wasn't playing a role anymore. She was leading a charge. And as Boebert's deflections grew weaker, Jasmine felt the weight of the moment shift in her favor. Her words weren't just reaching the room, they were reaching the people. The fight for educational reform wasn't just about numbers and policies. It was about lives, about futures, about the undeniable truth that the system had failed millions of children for too long. And Jasmine, now fully aware of the power of her words, was determined to make sure that truth could never be ignored again. The room had grown heavy with tension, the silent weight of Jasmine's words still hanging in the air. She could feel the momentum building in her favor. Her stance, unwavering and bold, set the stage for what would come next. Her plan. Jasmine didn't need to rely on theatrics anymore. Her argument was real, it was necessary, and it was backed by the raw truth of the inequalities faced by millions of children. She took a deep breath, and with a firm voice, she began to outline her vision for the future of education in America. "This isn't just a bill," Jasmine said, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "It's a blueprint for change. It's a roadmap for a system that puts the needs of our children first." Her hands moved as she spoke, each gesture emphasizing the urgency of what she was about to reveal. "First, we address the crumbling infrastructure of our public schools. We invest in the buildings, the classrooms, the very foundations that have been neglected for too long. Every child deserves to learn in a safe, modern environment. We're talking about new textbooks, updated technology, and repairing schools that have been falling apart for decades. This isn't a luxury, it's a necessity." The room was hanging on her every word. She paused, letting the gravity of her vision settle in before continuing. "Next, we tackle the dropout rates. Too many children are falling through the cracks, leaving school before they ever had a chance to succeed. We need to provide mentorship, support systems that ensure every student stays in school, not because they have to, but because they believe they can succeed. We need after-school programs, summer learning opportunities, and counselors who can guide them when the going gets tough." Her eyes shifted from the lawmakers to the gallery, where families and students silently watched. "But most importantly," Jasmine's voice grew firmer, "we focus on the children who need us the most, the ones from low-income families. We need to level the playing field. This bill isn't just about funding schools, it's about giving every child the opportunity to dream, to grow, and to reach their full potential." She let her words linger, knowing she had struck a chord. Without investment, without support, these kids will continue to be left behind, and we will be complicit in that failure. Jasmine's chest rose with the weight of her conviction. She wasn't just advocating for change, she was demanding it. The room was still, but it wasn't the silence of doubt. It was the silence of realization. Boebert, however, wasn't swayed. Her lips curled into a tight smile, a look of practiced confidence returning to her face. Jasmine had expected as much, and now she prepared herself for the inevitable backlash. Without missing a beat, Boebert stood again, the sharp edge of her voice cutting into the air. "So, this is it, huh? Another government-funded program that promises everything but delivers nothing." She smirked, clearly unfazed. "This isn't a solution. It's a show, a political stunt designed to pull on heartstrings and get votes. You can call it whatever you want, but the reality is, this bill is just another piece of legislation that sounds good in theory, but doesn't actually address the core issues. It's a theater production, and you, Jasmine, are the star. You're playing the role of the hero, but when the curtain falls, nothing changes." Boebert's words were like a dagger, aimed directly at the heart of Jasmine's vision. She could see the intent behind Boebert's attacks, to minimize the seriousness of what Jasmine had proposed, to reduce it all to mere political performance. But Jasmine knew better. She had seen the data, she had met the children, and she understood the stakes. Boebert's words, while sharp, were hollow. Jasmine wasn't about to let her dismiss the real needs of these children with empty rhetoric. With unwavering resolve, Jasmine responded, her voice calm but dripping with conviction. "You can call it theater all you want, Lauren, but the real performance is happening every day in our schools, where students are being robbed of their futures, where the rich get richer and the poor get left behind. This is not a game. This is the reality of millions of children who are depending on us. And if you can't see that, then you are the one who's missing the point." The words hit like a freight train, and Jasmine could see the subtle shift in the room. Boebert's usual confidence faltered slightly, and she could feel the collective breath of the audience holding steady, waiting for her next move. The debate had taken a turn. Jasmine had made it clear that this wasn't about playing politics. It was about the future of a generation. She wasn't backing down, and with every word she was pulling the truth closer to the surface, no matter how hard Boebert tried to bury it. The air in the room was thick with the tension that followed Boebert's dismissive remarks. Jasmine could feel the sting of her words, but it was a familiar sting, one she had grown accustomed to. It was the sting of people in power dismissing the needs of the most vulnerable. Boebert's attempt to reduce her proposal to political theater only fueled Jasmine's resolve. She was done playing defense. Now it was time to drive her point home with undeniable facts, with evidence that couldn't be ignored. Jasmine took a step forward, her voice calm but full of purpose. "You want to talk about empty promises, Lauren? Fine. Let's talk about the promises we've made to children all over this country and how we've failed them. You say more government isn't the answer, but look at the countries that have actually invested in their education systems. Look at Finland, where education is not a privilege, but a right for every child, regardless of their background. They have some of the best schools in the world, and it's because they've made education their priority. They've created a system where students from all walks of life succeed, where inequality is actively tackled through the investment of public resources." Jasmine's words were calculated, sharp, cutting through Boebert's objections like a sword through paper. "Look at Singapore, where they've made education their most important social equalizer. They've created a system where every child, no matter their socioeconomic status, is given the opportunity to succeed. And guess what? They've seen incredible results. Their students perform at the top of international rankings, not because of selective privatization, but because they've invested deeply in public education." The room was silent, the only sound the rustling of papers and the occasional cough. Jasmine could see Boebert's face tighten, the crack in her defense widening with each example. Jasmine wasn't done. "You want to talk about what works? Look at South Korea. Their investment in education has not only elevated their economy, it's lifted millions of people out of poverty. South Korea has one of the highest rates of high school graduation in the world, and that didn't happen by cutting funding or shrinking the government. It happened because they realized that education is the key to breaking the cycle of inequality. Jasmine's voice grew stronger, each example building on the last, each sentence a punch to Boebert's argument. This is not about more bureaucracy. This is about creating the opportunity for every child to thrive. This is about giving every student the chance to succeed, no matter where they come from. This is about breaking the chains of generational poverty with the one thing that can level the playing field: education. The silence in the room was deafening. Jasmine could feel the weight of her words hanging in the air, the faces of her colleagues watching, absorbing what she had just laid out. And across from her, Boebert sat motionless. For the first time in this debate, there was a crack in her armor. She had no response. Jasmine's arguments had been too strong, too grounded in reality for Boebert to refute. Jasmine took a breath, watching Boebert for any sign of a comeback, but none came. The smirk had faded from Boebert's face, replaced by a cold, hard expression. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. It was a rare moment in the room, where one side had so thoroughly overwhelmed the other with facts, with truth, that there was nothing left to say. Jasmine knew she had won this round, but more importantly, she had made it clear that education wasn't a luxury, it was a fundamental right, and it was the key to ending the cycle of inequality that had held too many children back for far too long. The atmosphere in the room was electric, a palpable tension hanging in the air as Jasmine finished her final point. Boebert had no response. The words that had once seemed so sure, so strong, now seemed hollow in the wake of Jasmine's irrefutable facts and fierce conviction. Jasmine had stepped into the ring, and she had not only fought back but had dominated the debate, leaving Boebert unable to muster a single comeback. For a long moment, the only sound was the rustling of papers and the soft click of pens. Boebert's lips pressed into a thin line as she leaned back, her posture stiffening, the weight of Jasmine's argument sinking in. Jasmine stood tall, eyes unwavering, the victory already hers, not just in the debate, but in the moment she had seized. She had taken the insult of the drama queen and turned it into something far more powerful, a symbol of her unrelenting fight for justice, for children who had been ignored for far too long. Jasmine knew that this wasn't just about winning an argument, it was about making a statement. Her passion for reform, for fighting the system that had failed so many, had resonated through every word she spoke. The very nickname Boebert had hurled at her had been transformed, now a banner of defiance, a mark of the fight she had chosen to take on. Jasmine had turned the tables, taking the narrative back into her hands. And then, as the silence in the room stretched on, the murmurs began. At first they were subtle, faint ripples of approval from those who had been silently watching, but soon the whispers grew louder, building into something undeniable. Jasmine wasn't just talking about drama, she was talking about real, systemic change. She was fighting for the children whose voices had been lost, for the families who had been forgotten. The room, once divided, now began to lean toward her side. Across the room, Boebert sat, still silent, eyes flicking over the pages of her notes, but there was nothing left for her to say. The argument had been settled. Boebert's earlier accusations had been drowned out by the weight of Jasmine's truth. The silence that had fallen was not one of uncertainty, but of realization, a collective understanding that Jasmine's words had struck at something deeper than politics. It was about fairness. It was about dignity. It was about the futures of millions of children who were being denied the opportunities they deserved. Jasmine turned slightly to face the audience, her eyes scanning the room, seeing the shift in their expressions. It was subtle, but it was there. The understanding, the recognition that this wasn't about political theater. Jasmine's eyes softened for a moment, but her voice never wavered as she spoke once more. This isn't just about me. This isn't about drama. This is about the children who are being left behind in a system that has failed them. This is about making sure every child, no matter where they come from, has a shot at a future, at a chance to thrive. If that makes me the drama queen, then so be it. Her words hung in the air, powerful and clear. They were no longer just a challenge to Boebert. They were a call to action. Jasmine had made it undeniable that her fight was about more than a bill. It was about changing the course of a system that had perpetuated inequality for generations. The energy in the room shifted. The murmurs grew into applause, tentative at first but swelling as Jasmine's message settled in. People were standing up, some nodding in agreement, others clapping, a wave of support rising in response to the unwavering courage Jasmine had shown. It wasn't just the lawmakers who were listening, it was the public, the millions who would feel the impact of the changes Jasmine was fighting for. Her words had sparked something real, something powerful. Boebert remained quiet, unable to regain her footing. The game had changed, and Jasmine had made it clear that she wasn't backing down. She had not only won the debate, but she had transformed a derogatory term into a banner of strength, of resilience, of a call to arms. The drama queen was no longer an insult. It was Jasmine's weapon, her declaration of war against a system that had forsaken the very children it was meant to protect. And in that moment, it was clear. Jasmine had emerged victorious, not just in the chamber, but in the hearts of those who had heard her truth. The applause from the room still echoed in Jasmine's ears as she stood tall, her shoulders squared, watching the lawmakers slowly return to their seats. The fight had just begun, but she could already feel the momentum shifting. For a brief moment, Jasmine allowed herself to feel the weight of her victory. She had not only turned Boebert's attempt to diminish her into a source of strength, but she had exposed the true nature of the injustice she was fighting against. The silence that had hung over the room was now filled with whispers, whispers that were growing louder, more supportive. Jasmine knew she had made an impact, but what truly mattered now was what came next, how the people in that room would respond. The first shift was subtle, a glance here, a nod there. It started with a few members of the room, hesitant at first, unsure whether to acknowledge what had just transpired. But as the weight of Jasmine's words continued to settle, those glances turned into nods of approval, then murmurs of agreement. Jasmine's transformation of the drama queen insult into a tool of resistance had captivated them. She had become more than just a politician standing up for a cause. She had become a voice that could not be ignored. Slowly but surely, Jasmine was earning the respect of those who had once dismissed her. It wasn't long before a familiar face across the aisle, Representative David Morgan, a moderate Republican who had previously kept his distance from the debate, stood. His voice, usually calm and neutral, now held a note of genuine admiration. "I must say," he began, his tone steady but filled with sincerity, "Jasmine has a point. We've seen the numbers, we've heard the stories, and while I don't agree with every solution proposed here, it's clear that our education system is in crisis." The room fell silent again, and for the first time some of Boebert's allies were shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Morgan's words ignited a ripple effect. Another Congresswoman, Emily Klein, a fellow Democrat who had been hesitant about some of Jasmine's more aggressive proposals, stood with a measured but firm nod. "Jasmine has shown us something important today. We can't keep ignoring the voices of the people who are suffering, who are being left behind in a system that only works for a few. This debate is no longer just about politics. It's about the future of our children, and that's a fight worth having." The applause grew louder, this time not from just Jasmine's supporters, but from both sides of the aisle. Jasmine had not only fought Boebert's dismissals, but had won over those who had once doubted her. Even some of Boebert's own colleagues began to shift, looking at each other with unease, their earlier certainty starting to crumble. Boebert, for all her force, couldn't argue against the moral high ground Jasmine had claimed. The term drama queen, meant to isolate and belittle, was now a symbol of Jasmine's resilience and ability to speak uncomfortable truths. The applause for Jasmine wasn't just approval for her policy, it was admiration for her strength in the face of ridicule, for turning an insult into a rallying cry. Jasmine's heart raced, but she kept her composure. The support was growing, but it was far from a win. She knew that this was just the beginning. The real work would come when they moved beyond the words and into the action. But right now, for the first time, she saw her colleagues, those who had once looked at her as a fringe player, begin to understand what she had been saying all along. Jasmine had proven, not just with her words, but with her conviction, that this fight was worth the struggle, that education was a battleground they couldn't afford to ignore. As the applause continued, Jasmine's mind raced ahead, planning for the challenges to come. Her victory in this room was significant, but it was just the start. She knew the road ahead would be hard, but now she had something far more important than support. She had momentum. Jasmine had shifted the debate, and now she wasn't just a voice in the crowd. She was leading it. The room had grown quiet, almost too quiet. Boebert had been silent for what seemed like an eternity, her usual quick retorts absent, replaced by the weight of her own realization. The momentum had shifted, the energy had turned, and she knew it. Jasmine's words had not just landed, they had struck with the force of a tidal wave. What was once a calculated insult, meant to derail her, had now become a symbol of Jasmine's power, her resilience, and her unwavering determination to fight for what was right. Boebert sat at her desk, her eyes fixed on the papers in front of her, but her mind wasn't on the words. She could feel the room shifting, the weight of Jasmine's argument pressing down on her. For the first time, she wasn't the one holding the floor. Boebert had come into this debate thinking she could easily dismiss Jasmine, thinking the label drama queen would silence her. Instead, she had watched as Jasmine had turned the very insult into a battle cry, one that resonated beyond the chamber and into the hearts of those who had been ignored for too long. The realization hit Boebert like a blow to the chest. She had underestimated Jasmine. She had underestimated the power of the truth Jasmine had exposed. The room had not rallied to her as she had expected. Instead, they had rallied to Jasmine. The more Boebert tried to push, the more Jasmine stood her ground, unshaken. Boebert's words, once so sharp, now felt dull, like a blade that had been blunted by the force of Jasmine's convictions. For a brief moment, Boebert's gaze flickered around the room, searching for support. But she found none. Even those who had once backed her, who had applauded her attempts to diminish Jasmine, now sat in uneasy silence, unwilling to challenge the raw truth Jasmine had so fearlessly laid out. Boebert's usual sharp edge had dulled. She had no more rebuttals, no more attacks to throw. Jasmine's strategy had worked. She had exposed the failure of Boebert's arguments, the emptiness behind her claims of fiscal responsibility. There was no place left for Boebert to hide. Boebert opened her mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. She closed it again, her jaw tight. There was nothing more to say. The moment she had feared was here. Jasmine had not only bested her in the debate, she had taken the very weapon Boebert had tried to use to silence her and turned it into her own strength. Boebert's carefully crafted narrative had collapsed under the weight of Jasmine's truth. Jasmine's eyes stayed focused on Boebert, but she didn't gloat. She didn't need to. The victory was already hers, not just in the debate, but in the greater fight for fairness. She had done more than win a verbal sparring match. She had shown the room the true cost of ignoring the voices of those who had been left behind by a system built to protect the wealthy and powerful. As Jasmine stood tall, her posture unyielding, she knew the battle was far from over. But today, in this room, she had claimed a victory. Boebert had no more arguments. The moniker, the drama queen, had been repurposed, twisted into something stronger, something that represented not weakness, but the strength to confront uncomfortable truths head-on. Jasmine had not just won this round. She had turned the tide of the conversation in a way no one had expected. And in that moment, Boebert had no choice but to accept it. The applause that filled the room was not just the echo of a well-fought victory. It was a resounding acknowledgement of Jasmine Crockett's relentless commitment, her passion for the voiceless children of this country, and her ability to turn what was meant to be an insult into a powerful force for change. Jasmine had not just won the debate with Boebert, she had reclaimed the narrative. The drama queen, a title intended to diminish her and dismiss her struggle, had now become the symbol of her strength, of her courage to confront the hard truths that many in this room would rather avoid. As Jasmine stood there, allowing the applause to wash over her, she could feel the weight of the moment. This wasn't a typical political win. It was something far more profound. It was the moment when she had turned the tables, when she had fought not just for a bill, but for something that went beyond policy. The very future of millions of children who had been forgotten, who had been abandoned by a system built to serve the privileged few. The look in Boebert's eyes, vacant, unable to respond, told Jasmine all she needed to know. The game had changed. Jasmine knew the battle wasn't over. It couldn't be. The applause was fleeting, the victory hard-won, but the road ahead was long, filled with the kind of resistance she had just faced. The systems in place would not be dismantled overnight, but what she had achieved was undeniable. Jasmine had become the face of a movement, a voice for those who had been ignored by the very institutions meant to protect them. She wasn't just a congresswoman anymore. She was a symbol of hope for the millions of children in underfunded, overcrowded schools. Children who had never had the luxury of a fair shot at success. The murmurs of agreement that followed her response were becoming louder. Jasmine could feel the shift in the room. Colleagues who had once turned their heads at her proposals were now looking at her with respect. They were hearing her in a way they had not before. It wasn't just her passionate delivery that was winning them over. It was the facts, the truths that she had laid bare with undeniable clarity. Boebert, who had once been so confident, now seemed smaller, diminished by the sheer force of Jasmine's argument. There was no clever retort, no scathing comeback to counter Jasmine's call for justice. Boebert's earlier jabs had failed to silence Jasmine. Instead, they had only fueled her fire, pushing her to make her case even stronger. The name the drama queen, which had been meant to undermine her, was now tied to a far greater cause, the cause of fairness, equity, and justice for all children, no matter their background. As Jasmine moved through the room, her heart still pounding with adrenaline, she knew that this victory wasn't just hers. It belonged to every child in America who was still waiting for their opportunity to rise. It was for every teacher who had to fight for the resources they deserved, every parent who had to choose between food and school supplies, every student who was told they weren't enough because they didn't have the same resources as their wealthier peers. Jasmine was no longer fighting alone. She had become the leader of a movement, one that demanded change and would stop at nothing to see it through. But Jasmine's victory was not just about the debate she had won. It was about what came next. The countless meetings, the paperwork, the endless negotiations. This was the beginning, not the end. The battle for education reform, for justice in the classroom, was a fight that would take more than one debate. It would take every ounce of her energy, her determination, and her courage to continue. But Jasmine was ready. As she walked back to her seat, she could feel the eyes of her colleagues on her, some in admiration, others in uncertainty. She knew that not all of them agreed with her. Not all of them understood the urgency of what she was fighting for. But that didn't matter anymore. Jasmine had shown them that the stakes were higher than they had realized. Education wasn't a luxury, it was a right, and she would fight for it, no matter how many times she was told to stop. Her phone buzzed as soon as she sat down. The first wave of public support was already pouring in. Social media erupted with messages of encouragement, hashtags filled with support for Jasmine's fight. People were seeing her for what she truly was, a politician willing to stand up for the voiceless, a leader who wasn't afraid to speak out against the entrenched powers that had ignored the needs of so many for so long. The drama queen, a term that had once been wielded to silence her, was now a badge of honor. It had become a symbol of those who would not be ignored, who would not be dismissed. And in the weeks to come, Jasmine would continue to rise, not just as a representative of her district, but as a leader in the fight for educational equity. Her opponents may have thought they could shut her down with an insult, but Jasmine had proven them wrong. The drama queen wasn't just a nickname. It was the rallying cry for the millions who had no voice, the ones who had been left behind by a system designed to protect the wealthy, the powerful, and the connected. Jasmine had found her voice, and she would make sure it was heard, loud, clear, and unstoppable. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.